Long before modern medicine, before global trade networks, and often before written language itself, certain plants held power that went far beyond simple nutrition or basic medicine. They were treated as sacred, fought over, taxed, hoarded, and in some documented cases, protected by laws carrying the death penalty for unauthorized possession. This is the story of 8 plants that genuinely helped shape entire civilizations and the very real, very human conflicts that grew up right alongside them. Frankincense, the fragrant resin harvested from a specific desert tree native to the Arabian Peninsula and parts of the Horn of Africa, functioned as a genuinely major economic and religious force across the ancient world for well over 1,000 years. Burned in religious ceremonies across ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and later throughout the Roman world. Frankincense commanded prices that could rival gold weight for weight during certain historical periods. The ancient incense trade routes connecting southern Arabia to the wider Mediterranean world generated such substantial wealth that entire prosperous city-states rose specifically around controlling and taxing this single valuable commodity. With some ancient historical accounts suggesting the incense trade rivaled the value of the famous Silk Road trade in certain specific historical periods. Silk itself, produced from the cocoons of a specific cultivated moth species feeding exclusively on mulberry leaves, was so fiercely protected as a closely guarded state secret in ancient China that revealing the actual specific production process to outsiders reportedly carried the death penalty for well over 1,000 years of Chinese imperial history. This wasn't simple textile production. It was a jealously guarded, extremely lucrative state monopoly, and the entire ancient Silk Road trade network, connecting China all the way to the Mediterranean world, developed substantially around this single closely controlled, highly coveted commodity. When Byzantine monks reportedly smuggled silkworm eggs out of China, hidden inside hollow walking canes sometime in the 6th century, they broke China's centuries-long monopoly and fundamentally reshaped global textile trade and production for centuries to come. Nutmeg, a comparatively small spice native specifically to a tiny cluster of Indonesian islands called the Banda Islands, triggered some of history's most genuinely brutal, well-documented colonial conflicts. European powers, and specifically the Dutch East India Company, fought wars and reportedly committed serious documented atrocities specifically to control this single small spice's global production and trade, since nutmeg commanded genuinely extraordinary prices in European markets, driven partly by a widespread, though ultimately unfounded, popular belief that it could help protect against the deadly bubonic plague. At one specific documented point in the 17th century, the Dutch reportedly traded an entire small Caribbean island, later known as Manhattan, directly to England specifically in exchange for full exclusive control over one single remaining nutmeg-producing island in Indonesia. Coca, the plant whose leaves contain the specific alkaloid compound cocaine, held deep, genuine religious and cultural significance across ancient Andean civilizations for thousands of years before European contact, used in religious ceremony, offered directly to mountain deities, and chewed to help manage the genuinely serious physical effects of high-altitude living. Archaeological evidence for coca leaf use in the Andes stretches back several thousand years, considerably predating any of coca's later, much more modern and controversial global associations by an enormous historical margin. Papyrus, the specific reed plant that gave ancient Egypt its foundational, revolutionary writing material, functioned as one of the ancient world's single most consequential and valuable exports for well over 2,000 consecutive years. Egyptian control over papyrus production was so genuinely significant to the entire ancient Mediterranean world's information economy that when Egypt reportedly restricted papyrus exports during specific historical periods, other ancient civilizations were forced to actively develop alternative writing materials, including parchment made from specially prepared animal skin, directly in response to that scarcity. Cacao, the raw source of modern chocolate, functioned in ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Aztec and Maya, as something considerably more significant than a simple food ingredient. Cacao beans reportedly served directly as a genuine functional form of currency in various documented Aztec markets, and cacao itself carried deep, well-documented religious significance. Believed by various Mesoamerican cultures to be a literal direct gift from specific important deities. The very specific scientific name for the cacao tree genus, Theobroma, coined many centuries later by the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, translates directly from ancient Greek roughly as food of the gods, a fitting, deliberately chosen name reflecting cacao's genuinely ancient and deeply sacred cultural reputation. Tobacco, native specifically to the Americas, held deep ceremonial and genuinely significant medicinal significance among numerous indigenous American cultures for thousands of years before European contact ever occurred, used in formal diplomatic ceremony, religious ritual, and traditional healing practice across an enormous range of documented cultures. Following European contact, tobacco rapidly became one of the single most economically significant globally traded commodities in world history, fundamentally reshaping entire colonial economies, though its specific later global public health consequences would prove genuinely and severely devastating. A complicated, sobering historical legacy well documented by modern medical science. Saffron, harvested by hand from the delicate stigmas of a specific autumn flowering crocus, remains today one of the world's single most expensive spices by weight, and its price has stayed remarkably consistently high across recorded history for a genuinely simple, unavoidable practical reason. Each individual flower produces only 3 usable stigma threads, meaning it takes tens of thousands of individually hand-picked flowers to produce just a single pound of usable spice. Ancient Persian, Greek, and Roman societies alike valued saffron enormously for dyeing fabric, a distinctive, prestigious golden yellow color, for use in perfume, and for various documented medicinal preparations, and historical records suggest counterfeit saffron. Adulterated with cheaper plant material to stretch the genuine product was such a persistent, well-documented problem that several medieval European cities enacted specific, formal laws imposing genuinely severe punishment, including death in certain historical jurisdictions, for anyone caught deliberately selling adulterated saffron. Sugarcane, native originally to parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, drove one of history's most genuinely devastating and consequential global trade systems once European colonial powers established large-scale plantation cultivation across the Caribbean and the Americas. The immense, ever-growing global demand for refined sugar directly fueled the horrific, well-documented transatlantic slave trade for centuries, forcibly transporting millions of enslaved African people specifically to work under brutal conditions on sugar plantations. Understanding sugar's specific deep historical role means confronting one of the single most genuinely tragic, consequential chapters in all of global economic history. A sobering reminder that valuable plants have driven not only genuine wonder and prosperity throughout history, but also some of humanity's very worst, most extensively documented atrocities. Vanilla, harvested from a specific orchid species native to Mesoamerica, remains today the second most expensive spice in the world by weight, right behind saffron, for a genuinely fascinating and equally labor-intensive reason. Unlike most other flowering plants, vanilla orchids grown outside their native range lack the specific natural pollinator needed for fertilization, meaning virtually every single vanilla flower grown commercially worldwide today must be hand-pollinated by human workers within a narrow window of just a few hours after the flower first opens. Ancient Aztec civilizations first cultivated and used vanilla, mixing it directly into cacao-based ceremonial drinks. And when Spanish conquistadors brought vanilla back to Europe, its extraordinarily labor-intensive cultivation process kept it a genuinely rare, expensive luxury for centuries afterward. Black pepper, sometimes called black gold throughout considerable stretches of ancient and medieval history, drove enormously profitable and highly competitive long-distance trade between South Asia and the wider Mediterranean and European world for well over 2,000 consecutive years. Ancient Roman writers documented pepper's remarkably high market value directly. And medieval European trade routes, specifically built around securing reliable pepper access, helped substantially fund and directly motivate the age of exploration, including Vasco da Gama's historically consequential sea voyage, specifically seeking a direct maritime trade route to India's lucrative pepper-producing regions, bypassing the expensive existing overland trade routes entirely. What unites these 11 genuinely different plants, spanning wildly different continents, cultures, and specific historical eras, is the sheer remarkable degree to which human societies organized real, substantial power, serious warfare, deep, genuine religious meaning, and vast accumulated wealth around specific botanical resources that, viewed purely objectively, are simply plants growing directly out of the ground. Understanding this deep,